All right. Good morning. And welcome everyone. I am Carissa Siren, and I would like to welcome everyone to day 2 for the first ever meeting of the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council, also known as the neyac. The agency appreciates the time and diligent work of our neyac members in preparing for this meeting and for their forthcoming deliberations. Thank you for joining us from across the country, both virtually and in person. I also wish to thank our EPA colleagues, Administrator Regan, for all their efforts in preparing for this meeting. We will now move into a few words as the designated federal officer, also known as the DFO. As the DFO for this meeting, I serve as a liaison between the neyac and EPA. I am also responsible for ensuring all provisions of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, also known as FACA, are met regarding the operations of the neyac. With the meeting operations today, the neyac members wishing to comment or ask question will raise their hand signal or use their meeting chat if a virtual participant, and raise your name tent if you are in-person participant. Once you are done speaking, please take your virtual hand or name tent down. Please be mindful to exercise appropriate meeting decorum, and please mute your computer and or phone when not speaking, and pay particular attention to your camera is turned on or off. These steps will help avoid any background interference or disruptions. Per FACA, minutes of this meeting will be prepared. The minutes will include a description of the matters discussed and the conclusions reached by the neyac members. As DFO, I prepare the minutes and will ensure they are certified by the meeting chairs and vice chair within 90 calendar days of this meeting. The minutes of this meeting will be available through the neyac website. I will now have the members roll call. When you hear your name announced, please acknowledge your presence by stating here or present. I will start with those participating virtually. Emmanuel Alacantar.
Present.
Christy Drutman. Wawa Gatharu. Osa Sanaga Ayador.
Here, present.
Sophia Kiani. Alexandra Angerman. Present. Rachel Billiet Brule. Present. Nicholas Blumenthal.
Present.
Colton Buckley.
Present.
Meghana Kunapareddy. Present. Gabriel Nagel.
Present.
Kira O'Brien. Present. Lisette Perez. Asada Rashidi. Present. Paige Sierragotis.
Present.
Thank you. That concludes the members' roll call, and this meeting is officially called to order. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to your chairpersons who will facilitate the remainder of the meeting. Chairs Gabriel Nagel and Kira O'Brien.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chair alongside Kiera. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Administrator Michael Regan, who's established this historic council. And today he'll start off with some quick introductions before we get into a roundtable discussion on today's charged topics.
Thank you, Gabriel, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Carissa, for your leadership. Listen, I'm excited to be here today to join you all for day 2 of the first ever neyac convening. Before we begin, I really want to make it clear that this is your meeting. I am here to listen and to steer the conversation, but this is your meeting. This gathering represents a major step forward in our agency's effort to bring forth the perspective of young people as we work together to address the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. The topics we're talking about today, the charged questions that you will be discussing, were carefully crafted thanks to your thoughts and your feedback. The work and the decisions that you all will make over the next year will have significant impact on the future of our communities as well as the future of our planet. Since day 1 of this administration, I've made an effort to ensure that young people always have a seat at the table. To be part of the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council means you have been selected as the voice of your communities, the voice of your generations. Through your work, achievements, community organizing, and more, every single one of you has harnessed the power to create change in your communities that address environmental issues all across our great nation. We have carefully selected every one of you for the first ever cohort of the neyac. We received over 1,200 applications during the process, but your perspectives, your experiences, your knowledge set you apart from all the others. And we're expecting you to bring that same energy every single meeting and every single time you represent the neyac. As leaders of the next generation of change makers, you can't let this opportunity go to waste. I want you to make sure that you understand the power that you all have by participating on the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council. You hold the power to amplify your priorities. You hold the power to amplify the priorities of your generation for visions of a safer and cleaner future and the direct dialogue at the federal level in a way that has never been done before. Remember to use your platform and influence as neyac members to engage and uplift your peers in conversations concerning climate anxiety, climate change, environmental justice, and so much more. Remember that this is a crucial point in history where your voices and your perspectives are valued. You truly have the potential to make a real difference in this agency's decision-making processes. And remember that I and my team are here to help and support you every step of the way. Let's work together to ensure that your voices are at the heart of the decisions made here at EPA, and that your ideas are driving the solutions that will put the planet on a path to being healthier and more sustainable for every single person in this country. So without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Administrator Regan, for those empowering and encouraging words. We will now begin a discussion on the council's feedback regarding yesterday's presentations and charge questions. As a reminder, if you're participating virtually, please raise your virtual hand and we'll try to accommodate those questions first to include everybody in this discussion. And if you're here in person with us, please raise your tent card and don't forget to turn on your microphone.
To start off our roundtable discussion, we will discuss the topic of environmental justice, specifically looking at how it impacts youth communities. To begin this discussion, I'll hand it over to our council member, Asada, who will share her 2-minute perspective on the issue, and then we'll continue throughout a few other council members' perspectives.
Thank you. Growing up in Newark, I witnessed a silent crisis that has plagued our community, an environmental injustice that strikes at the very core of our well-being. In the largest city in New Jersey, Newark, a staggering 1 in 4 children suffers from asthma, a rate 3 times higher than the national average. I've lived through this reality with 2 asthmatic brothers, unaware of the profound impact our environment had on their respiratory health until I delved into environmental studies. Newark hosts 3 fossil fuel power plants, a 4th one proposed, countless polluting industrial facilities, 3 Superfund sites, an incinerator, and the 5th largest sewage treatment plant in the country. The South Ward, my home, is the backyard to the port and the nation's 2nd largest port. And we've done a truck count study where we've observed over 7,000 trucks passing through 1 intersection in 6 hours spread between 2 days. Unfortunately, there's a dire lack of adequate data on air pollution in South Ward. The only regulatory air monitoring station in Newark has been offline for over a year, and this leaves residents defenseless, enforcement agencies paralyzed, and policymakers in the dark, exacerbating the adverse impacts of air pollution on low-income communities. I've seen firsthand how this unfair treatment has impacted the health of my family, friends, and neighbors. It is crucial to inform, empower, and engage communities to advocate for themselves against the environmental injustices and the decision-making policies affecting our neighborhoods and quality of life. Frontline communities like ours face unequal burdens from toxic emissions. Port pollution, particularly in environmental justice communities, increases asthma, heart disease, and cancer rates. And the delay in comprehensive policies mandating emission reductions across the freight sector is unacceptable. And the technology and the economic benefits of moving towards zero emissions while prioritizing environmental justice are not just feasible,
but it's deadly to continue to delay action. It is imperative that EPA takes immediate action to protect our children, our families, and our communities. It is time for action, not just for us, but for the countless communities facing similar challenges across the nation. Let our voices unite through neyac, providing advice and recommendations, championing environmental justice and sustainable solutions for climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Azada. Next, we'll go to Alex.
Hello, my name is Alexandra Ingerman, and I'm from Wrangell, Alaska, the land of the Shtokeen. I represent tribal and remote areas, and as we gather here today, I'm reminded of a recent tragedy that struck my hometown. On November 20th, 2023, a catastrophic landslide occurred, leaving behind a trail of destruction and devastation. But amidst the mud and rubble, we are also facing buried toxic waste, compounding the plight of already disadvantaged people and harming a traditional harvesting beach. The local tribe that I'm privileged to work for blazed a new trail with FEMA and are currently waiting on a response. It is in moments like these that we must recognize the invaluable wisdom of Indigenous peoples. For over 10,000 years, Indigenous communities have thrived in harmony with nature, serving as stewards of the land. Their deep connection and reverence for the environment offer profound lessons in resilience and sustainability. By embracing increased co-stewardship with tribes, we can tap into this wealth of knowledge and forge a path towards a more resilient future. However, our acknowledgement of Indigenous wisdom must not end in mere admiration. It must be the foundation upon which we continue to build a robust policy and strategies to combat climate change and protect vulnerable communities. The EPA has a crucial role to play in championing environmental justice, ensuring equitable access to resources, and fortifying infrastructure against the escalating threats of climate disasters. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. And now we'll move to our virtual participant, Emmanuel.
Thank you so much. My name is Emmanuel Alcantar. I'm from South Los Angeles, and I represent the interests of pollution-burdened communities on the neyac. As a young person, I'm acutely aware that the climate change is set to exacerbate significantly within my lifetime, even under the best-case scenarios. Advancing environmental justice stands as one of the most pressing issues of our time, and I firmly believe we should be using every tool in our toolbox to combat the climate crisis. For me, this entails prioritizing measures such as investing in clean energy, creating good-paying jobs in disadvantaged communities, and building dense housing. I think about my own community in South Los Angeles, where we suffer from some of the worst air pollution in the country. We have the lowest median income in the entire county of Los Angeles, and we have inequitable access to healthy food. And our air pollution problems are only exacerbated by the presence of two major freeways, emissions from nearby warehouses, insufficient urban tree canopy, and rising temperatures. And I know that my community is unfortunately not unique in this. Across Region 9 that I represent on the neyac, similar patterns of environmental justice persist, whether it's air pollution or unequitable access to clean water in states like Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and in tribal communities in the region. The effects of our climate crisis and the impacts of our reliance on fossil fuels bear down disproportionately on disadvantaged communities. And yet, in acknowledging these challenges, there is an opportunity in the clean energy transition to create more livable and equitable communities where, regardless of zip codes, regardless of who you are, we can uplift the well-being of all of our residents. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Meghana.
Thank you, Kira. My name is Meghana Kunapareddy, and I'm from Houston, Texas, and I represent the interests of environmental educators specifically focused on incorporating environmental justice into school curriculums. Being from Houston, I've seen firsthand the impacts that environmental justice that is stemmed from economic reliance on the oil industry starts, especially in Gulf Coast cities, where a lot of people rely on things like the oil industry, but are unable to advocate for themselves and the environmental injustices they face because there's no formal education for students to learn how to advocate for themselves. Specifically in Houston neighborhoods such as Galena Park and Manchester, which face some of the worst air pollution in all Gulf Coast cities across the entire United States. In order to make sure that not only are these students' voices heard, it's absolutely imperative that we integrate environmental justice into formal education systems, teaching students how to build solutions, not just teaching them about the problems that they face. Because in order for the youth voice to truly be heard, not only do they need to understand the challenges they face, but they need to understand how they can directly combat these issues. And in places like Houston and other Gulf Coast cities, where the oil industry plays a major role in students' lives, it's essential that we begin to build formal education systems that directly target these issues and specifically focus on the ones that youth face in various communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Magana. And now for our last council member speaking in environmental justice, we'll move to Lizette.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisette Perez, and I'm from Chicago, Illinois, representing the interests of environmental advocates from disadvantaged communities. Growing up in Chicago, I've witnessed firsthand the impact of environmental injustice and the power of education in driving positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizette, and thank you to everyone who has shared their perspective on environmental justice. Now we're going to switch to the topic of climate change with a particular thank you to the EPA Office of Air and Radiation for their presentation yesterday on climate, clean air, and environmental justice. First, we'll kick it off with Gabriel.
Thank you, Kiera. So I'm Gabriel Nagel, and I am from Denver, Colorado, representing Region 8, and also the perspective of youth focused on changing policy within their school districts. Growing up in Colorado, I was always close to nature. I remember hiking and skiing and camping, but year after year, I watched the impact of heat and climate change reduce the snow and make it harder for me to spend time outside. Eventually, in 2017, a wildfire evacuated me from my home. And in that moment, I realized that the impact the climate crisis was having, not just on the future, but in the present, right here and right now. The climate crisis is disproportionately impacting youth. And in the topic of climate change, it's critical that we are taking steps, and the EPA is taking steps to elevate the youth voice. Specifically, when looking at the charged questions of this topic, the EPA can increase outreach to youth communities. While the EPA has various resources in communities, targeting these resources towards the youth perspective is crucial. Next, when looking at youth interests in climate change, I've learned in my work developing policy in my own school district that it's often the case that youth are motivated and willing to take change, but they need an effective platform to do so. The EPA can help mobilize resources and support the local communities in the climate crisis, as it's often the youth in these communities who know what they are struggling with the most and how to effectively adapt to those situations. Additionally, another issue that I've seen within these youth perspectives in climate change is climate anxiety, which I've personally struggled with. Youth across our nation are seeing that the future of our world is at stake. And it's critical that the EPA takes time to both uplift youth perspectives while also taking their own actions to ensure that we're making effective changes in the climate crisis. And finally, when looking at what success of neyac means, to me, it means that we are not just here to share our voices and our perspectives, but that we're also making a substantial impact within the agency, and that our recommendations are heard and make a difference in representing youth across our nation. Because this is truly a historic moment in which we can represent youth and bring youth to the table of decision making. And I hope to see that continue on along with your support, Administrator Regan. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Next, we'll hear from Osa Senega.
Good morning to everyone who's participating virtually and everyone in person, to my colleagues on the neyac and Administrator Regan. My name is Osa Senega. I come from Hyde Park, a neighborhood in Boston with a legacy of environmental hazards. And my role on the council is to represent the interests of science policy communicators focused on the correlation between environmental health and the impacts of climate change. In relation to the topic of climate change, I want to start by acknowledging how challenging it is to effectively communicate the impacts of climate change without first addressing other pressing concerns, especially for youth from disadvantaged communities. When education on climate change is done poorly, it only exacerbates the disproportionately high levels of toxic stress in these communities, and it leads to pessimism, which engenders inaction. And when climate education on the health and climate benefits of climate-friendly policy is not communicated in a way that shows the distributive impact of these initiatives, it begets a lack of community engagement on climate action. And so this is some of the insight I have gained over the last several years as a local climate activist and as a podcaster for environmental health on the Climate Doctor No MD. Um, I'm really grateful for the presentations yesterday, specifically the one on the charged topic of climate change. And so if we want to explain the intricate correlation between environmental health and climate change to all people, we need to meet them where they are and speak their language. When it comes to the EPA's grants, proposed standards, and for pollution reduction and technical assistance initiatives, in our outreach towards youth populations, we have to work towards expanding the physical presence of EPA resources. And in one way, that means when the EPA is providing guidelines for communicating the massive health and climate benefits, it should be done in a way that communicates the distribution of these impacts for a household and the youth community members, so that a layperson can understand. But also, we should work with community members as much as we want to work for them, we work with them so that whatever concerns they bring to us, then we think about how we can put environmental health solutions on that, things that are also climate friendly solutions for that. But they already are intelligent and capable community members and they have their concerns, and we want to address those first before we can really get into the climate engagement that we also want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Osenega, for sharing your perspective. And now we'll move on to Wawa, if present.
I think we have Wawa and Sophia are not able to join us right
Okay, in that case, we'll move to Kiera.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for being with us here today. Just wanted to talk with you a bit about climate change. Like Alexandra, I was born and raised in southern Southeast Alaska in an island community where I saw the impacts of climate change up close. Our way of life in Alaska is deeply impacted by our changing environment, but we are also a community that is deeply reliant on energy. We're on an isolated grid in Alaska. We have a lot of access issues when it comes to very basic energy supply. And so our community is very sensitive to the transition. As somebody who now works in project development for a clean energy developer, I have had a lot of opportunities to reflect on sustainability, not as an academic practice, but as a community practice, and what that means to not just discuss sustainability in the abstract about what are we doing at the individual level. Are you recycling your Starbucks cup? Are you recycling your water bottle? But making sure the communities that desperately need to transition, that desperately need the clean energy, that desperately need to be the ones prioritized for this transition are included and are fully bought in this process. And so it's not just talking about this as a transition for our country or climate change as an issue that is impacting our world, but it's a deeply personal issue. So that was just the reflection that I wanted to share, that I think these presentation topics are a wonderful synthesis of what this issue is. Climate change is an issue that can't be taken in isolation from environmental justice, which cannot be taken in isolation from the circular economy. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be here and to speak with you today.
Thank you, Kiera. And I think you raised an important point that all here together, we have seen the experience and witnessed the impact of climate change individually. And climate change to us isn't just something that's abstract and in the numbers or statistics, but it has a personal impact on all of us and youth communities across the United States. So I think that's something that we're really looking forward to accomplishing over the next 2 years, is how to really make those differences in our communities. So now, transitioning from climate change, we're going to move on to our third and final topic, which is the circular economy. To start us off on this topic, we'll move to Nick.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Mr. Administrator. We certainly appreciate your taking the time to be here with us this morning. As you noted several weeks ago at the UN Security Council Guyana ministerial meeting, food loss and food waste comprise a compounding issue exacerbating the detrimental effects of climate change. I appreciate the EPA's continued record of championing the importance of global cooperation to alleviate its burden, and especially recognize the agency's extensive track record of international leadership across numerous forums. As an activist deeply ingrained in national and international food and agricultural sectors, it's encouraging to see that federal guidelines, such as December's draft national strategy on reducing food loss and waste, outlines a sustainable path forward with the endorsement of the federal government. Nevertheless, we currently stand at an opportune moment to embrace and catalyze the complementary work of local and youth-led organizations that demonstrate a practical opportunity to lead this movement in our country into the future. Through my local community garden, I've witnessed firsthand how the power and motivation of the American people know no bounds. In the midst of the pandemic, a dedicated community member began the Giving Garden in our small college town of Gainesville, Florida, repurposing an abandoned parking lot back to nature and for our communal good. Only a couple of years later, our effort has expanded to harvesting and distributing thousands of pounds of food every year of sustainably produced fresh fruits and vegetables to be distributed to impoverished communities across our county, piloting climate resilient crops for our local farmers, and coordinating citywide food composting efforts. Without the support of our local government's leadership, our efforts would not have been possible. Another example closer to home here in Washington, a youth-led organization in West Virginia last fall was able to prevent the food loss of over 36 million apples from 11 native growers in West Virginia and distribute those apples to anti-hunger charities across the region. Their impact, preventing 16 million pounds of potential food waste, was significantly enhanced from technical and regulatory guidance alongside financial support from the USDA and the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. We look to the guidance of the EPA to lead the development and support of outstanding citizen organizations on various levels from local, state, and up to national levels that seek to provide and scale solutions for food waste within our great nation. As the EPA has exhibited a courageous willingness to initiate global action around sustainable food systems, I hope that over the coming years, you will continue to champion the same passion for that same local, state, and national leadership here at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Now over to Colton.
Howdy and good morning, Administrator Regan. My name is Colton Buckley and I'm from Gatesville, Texas in Region 6, and I represent rural and agricultural communities on the neyac. I want to first publicly thank you for your support and the administration's support in recognizing the importance of rural communities on this Federal Advisory Council and showcasing that we matter in your work each and every day. The relationship between the Environmental Protection Agency and America's rural communities, farmers and ranchers is of paramount importance for several reasons. This relationship plays a crucial role in addressing environmental challenges, promoting sustainable practices, and ensuring the well-being of both the agricultural sector and the environment. My personal passion for rural resiliency comes from my experience living with the land and learning from it through a childhood of being raised on my grandparents' Brangus cow-calf operation. Like thousands of agriculture producers each year, a drought a decade ago nearly shuttered my family ranch. Rural communities face unique obstacles in responding and preparing to climate change due to economic diversity, an aging population, and the isolation of rural communities. Rural communities are often closely connected, and their livelihoods are intertwined with the land. The EPA's engagement with these communities fosters a sense of shared responsibility for environmental conservation. This collaborative approach helps build trust and ensure that policies align with the needs and values of rural populations, but there's still work to be done. American farmers on average are above the age of retirement, 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide than the regular American population, and are seeing more and more of their work product ending up in landfills instead of American and global plates. Production costs are at an all-time high. Our communities are farming less ground for more people each and every day, and rural America is becoming home to fewer and fewer young people like me due to economic barriers. But folks, rural America is prepared to build back stronger than ever with this administration. With this historic Inflation Reduction Act, dollars being utilized to support rural and underserved communities, and coupled with the dedicated youth involved in 4-H and FFA programs across the nation, we can work to improve food education and have happy students instead of healthy trash cans. Through program initiatives here at EPA to reduce food loss and waste, we can work to eliminate food deserts in rural isolated communities, whether they be in Appalachia, Deep West Texas, or anywhere in the country. Through my work with Resource Conservation Development Councils, known as RC&Ds nationwide, we engage directly with this generation in supporting conservation work, rural community development, and environmental education. A positive and collaborative relationship between the EPA, its interagency work with USDA, and America's rural communities, farmers, and ranchers is crucial for achieving a balance between environmental protection and agricultural sustainability. Mr. Administrator, this partnership can lead to more effective policies, increased adoption of sustainable practices, and a healthier coexistence between agriculture and the environment. As y'all say in Washington, I'll yield the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. Yeah, I mean, I think you both raise incredible points that while work has been done at the EPA, we still need to see much more work. And now continuing on the topic of circular economy, I'll hand it over to Paige.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Gabriel. My name is Paige Siragotis. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and I represent the connection between psychology, mental health, and the environment. So I wanted to touch on something related actually to the first charge question of this section of how the EPA can more effectively engage young people specifically on social media to reduce food waste. We all know that social media is one of the best tools to reach out to youth. A ton of young people are on it. However, the agency must understand why social media is so good at doing this in order to effectively engage youth. Simply using social media and posting will not necessarily reach youth and effectively engage them. A lot of the reasoning behind social media being so effective is due to shorter attention spans that our generation has developed. As Gen Z, we've been bombarded with constant information since we were very young, something that the human brain is not necessarily meant to handle while developing. And the influx of information forced our brains to adjust and essentially filter out everything that was unimportant and that we didn't need to know. So on social media, if you want to stand out and catch our attention, you have to make us care. We consume and process so much media daily that you have to stand out to get our attention, or else the information will unfortunately go in one ear and out the other. Understanding this fact will help shape social media outreach at the EPA, both in this office and in general. And it's essential that we aren't too cynical about food waste. We know climate anxiety is a massive issue specifically. Also, Gabriel talked about this a bit. My generation has never known a time where we were told our world was going to be okay. We get constant daily messaging on how our world is actively dying, with some saying completely unsavable. And this doesn't foster hope, care, or a need to change something that seems fundamentally unfixable. So to get youth to care, you have to let them know that they have the power to change what you are discussing and that there is real hope for their futures, or else they simply will focus on another topic. Specifically, since food waste is such an overwhelming topic to many, for specific individual youth, give them things to reduce food waste that aren't too daunting. Share some recipe websites that discuss how to use forgotten vegetables in your fridge, and talk more about how to store food properly to last the longest. Discuss how to create effective meal plans. Things that will both help them that they feel is important and that will also help the environment that aren't too difficult or daunting for them to handle. So when reaching out to youth, it's essential to understand how our generation processes information, appeal to their emotions, and provide hope for the future, because unfortunately, we haven't gotten a lot of that during our lifetimes so far. So thank you. Thank you, Paige. Now over to Christy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Administrator Regan and all the other members of the NEyac. I'm Christy Drutman, and I represent the interests of environmental advocates working at the intersections of media, diversity, and environmentalism, and advancing opportunities for green careers. This topic is really one that is close to my heart as well when we're talking about protecting the interests of young people and making sure that the administration is being able to do strategic targeted messaging that educates young people about the opportunity of the circular economy. I think there's such huge opportunities for jobs, especially when it comes to waste recovery and being able to build new economic systems that could actually provide young people with work training and long-term career opportunities. There's so many new jobs that are opening up in this industry, as indicated by the reports that you all have put out. And I think that if the administration could tap into talking more about what the economic opportunity is and what kind of skill sets are on the horizon for young people to tap into those opportunities to get them prepared, starting as young as high school on their high school campuses to then university to learn how they could skill stack and be really at the top of expertise and thought leadership when it comes to being experts in circular economy. I think we could see a lot more young people being engaged in the conversation, especially on social media. And I think that if there's an opportunity for the administration to bring in some experts, especially people focused on food recovery and food waste, to talk with young people about what they're trying to do to bridge the gap, I think more young people would be really engaged in that conversation. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Christy. And now we'll move to Rachel, who will share final thoughts on the circular economy.
Eletu, my name is Rachel Billiot. I am Homa in Chitamacha, and I come from Southeast Louisiana, where the Mississippi River flows into the Gulf. I represent the interests of Indigenous and tribal people who have experienced firsthand the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation. I often hear stories from elders of how many people living in our bayou communities barely registered the Great Depression because they were able to provide for themselves from gardens, marshes, and forests, or otherwise trade with their neighbors for what they did not have. I've heard similar stories from Alaskan natives who keep traditional food fridges and Western grocery fridges, and how their subsistence lifestyles and local food systems provided for them during the height of the pandemic when the grocery stores were left empty. Indigenous communities have been involved in circular economies since before colonization through our extensive food forest trade routes, regenerative agriculture practices, and honorable harvests that treated food as a gift rather than a commodity and respected it as such. Western society as a whole has largely been divorced from their connection to food and the knowledge of how it is harvested, prepared, and cared for. This ultimately leads to a lack of respect for food systems and the environments and processes that create them. It is vital that we restore people's connections to food if you want to reduce food waste. Going back to an Indigenous perspective, today, as Native communities work to recover from ongoing effects of colonialism, we instill values such as the honorable harvest and native plant gardens in our youth as we reclaim our food sovereignty and health. However, this way of life has become increasingly threatened by anthropogenic activities that disregard our ecosystems and the role we play in environmental health. Where I live, we see how the land sinks, seawaters rise, saltwater pushes in, and habitats convert from freshwater to saltwater environments to eventually open waters. Our forests become ghosts, our traditional lifeways become lost among the skeletons of plants that have always provided for us. My grandfather says that the deterioration is so great that places they've once gone to hunt rabbits and deer 1 year have become places to catch shrimp and fish 5 years down the line. We are losing our ability to provide for ourselves with gardens and traditional plant foods due to industries and our own governments treating us as a sacrifice zone. We should not be a sacrifice zone for reasons and impacts. The reasons and impacts go beyond much farther than ourselves. Sorry. Go much further than just affecting us. It affects the rest of the world as well. So in your efforts towards food waste and reducing this, I also ask that you remember the protection of these habitats and people that have been disproportionately affected by industry interest and environmental degradation, especially as we work more towards food sovereignty and reclamation of these lifeways and connections between people and the land and the environment. So Yakoki, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Sophia, if you're able to provide comment, over to you. And if not, then we have a few more minutes. So if anyone else would like to provide some additional reflections while we have the administrator's time, now would be the appropriate moment. Nick?
Pertaining to climate change and the charge question's interest in promoting youth engagement, I think a key aspect to consider is the difference between what it means to be an advocate and what it means to be an activist. Over the past 10 years, we've seen an incredible number of youth become engaged and galvanized in order to take a stand, in order to promote awareness of climate change and the impacts that it has on our Earth, both within our communities and across the country and other communities that may be foreign to us as well. I think it's similarly important to recognize the potential that youth have in order to be activists within their communities as well. I know within your local travels to both Mozambique and Ghana, you were exposed to the incredible wealth and potential that youth have in terms of pioneering innovations in order to make a difference within their communities. And I believe that there's a lesson that we can take and adopt back here at home as well. There are many youth that are in positions where they're interested in making a difference, whether it's through a research lab or whether it's through a social impact campaign, and providing those sorts of resources and guidance of how they can take a stand in a significant matter. Oftentimes we talk about climate change as something that's incredibly important. We less so talk about how difficult it is in order to manage the interests of various stakeholders in order to promote a overall difference and positive net good when it comes to specific industries that truly do need the reform. And the EPA has the sort of technical resources, it has the frameworks and the knowledge of how to go about, or at least initiate the conversations of how we approach these difficult subjects within each of these different industries. And so ways that we could engage youth, whether it's through formal fellowships or whether it's through consultations with interested youth that do want to make a difference, in order to bring them into these conversations and provide them with more seats at the table, such as the neyac, in order to learn and become the futures of tomorrow within their respective industries, would be incredibly helpful to create the next generation of activists rather than simply more advocates. And that sort of lesson is one that I believe is applicable to youth across the country in addition to the world. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. And seeing as Sophia has rejoined, we'll now hand it over to you for 2 minutes on the topic of climate change.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Kiani, and I represent resources with youth across the globe. When we think about climate change through the lens of climate education, it's imperative to talk about a range of topics, all the way from the circular economy to food waste, really focusing on sustainable solutions to resource management. By promoting circularity, where products are designed to be reused, repaired, and recycled, we can reduce waste, conserve resources, and minimize environmental impacts. Embracing the circular economy is inherently linked to climate justice, and making sure that we can make people aware that advocating for equitable solutions to climate change comes from acknowledging the disproportionate impact of environmental degradation on marginalized communities really helps us to address environmental injustices by reducing pollution, minimizing resource extraction from vulnerable regions, and fostering more sustainable consumption and production patterns. Communities that are already bearing the brunt of climate change, often low-income, Indigenous, and communities of color, are disproportionately impacted by the linear economy's negative consequences, such as pollution, resource depletion, and waste mismanagement. Through making sure that young people have access to adequate climate education, they can become empowered to work on climate solutions. And really my work with my nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, has been focused on ensuring that youth across the globe, particularly those that are worst impacted by climate change, feel empowered to make sure that they can actually enter environmental jobs and resources, which is work that the EPA can continue to fund and support to ensure that young people across the globe feel empowered to engage with their policymakers.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Now over to Colton.
Yes, thank you. In regards to the charge questions about ensuring youth and communities and how EPA can properly engage, I highly recommend that the agency look at starting some type of collegiate outreach or ambassador program. In talking with rural communities, with underserved communities, and with young people across this country, I highly believe you've got to meet our folks where we are with who we are, and work with local community-based organizations that are talking specifically to those people and covering the types of jobs that are available with the Environmental Protection Agency, the degree and any classes that may be required so individuals don't feel that barrier in wanting to get into this line of work to support the restoration of resiliency in American climate. I also think when it comes to the historic number of grants that are being ascertained at both the state and local level, to maybe open up a specific pilot program for youth founded and youth led organizations, so that the people that are impassioned and are doing the work on the ground actually have a seat at the table of gaining some of the resources coming out of the federal government and programs like the Inflation Reduction Act to continue the work they're doing, to bring more young people into the circle of what we are trying to do and support the work that you and the agency are doing each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. I think that's an incredibly important point. I mean, we need to keep bringing together perspectives of youth like us, like we're doing now in the larger community, whether that's high school or college. Now moving on, we'll hand it over to Megana.
Thank you, Gabriel. So I think one thing that's really important when we look at climate change and bringing clean energy into cities is to focus on the equitable transition into clean energy. In a lot of really industrial cities, for marginalized communities, working in things like the oil industry is the only thing they know. So I know that right now the EPA has tax across the country where they focus on integrating solutions into different communities and giving them the resources that they need to become more equitable when it comes to climate change. But when we're focusing on integrating clean energy into different cities, it's incredibly important that these TikToks focus on providing education opportunities to a lot of the marginalized communities in these places. Because not only do they not know how to get involved in sectors when they come into these cities, but it's incredibly important to let them understand that not only can they get involved, but it also provides the same economic opportunity that things like the oil industry have provided to them for the last couple of decades. Because for a lot of these people, the reason that they're not getting involved is because they don't think that they can economically rely on a lot of these new industries that are coming in. So I think that's something that's really important when we're engaging youth, is to show them that there's still opportunity in a lot of these sectors, because a lot of them don't know that right now.
Thank you, Megana. Now over to Osa Seneca.
So thank you again for your time. I really wanted to emphasize what Colton just said, and also Magana. I think the idea of connecting with youth and meeting them where they are, that capacity building really demands to me. I know we talk a lot about social media and there how much can be done there, but we think, or I think that physical presence is really somewhere where the EPA can grow, and especially with the Tic Tac idea that Magana just referenced. I'm really interested in seeing how the EPA can expand the presence of these Tic Tacs. I know there's only 16, and having partnership networks for the Tic Tacs throughout the region, such that I know like there might be constraints, but how can we push it so that there are several partnerships for every environmental justice community within a specific region that a Tic Tac is connected to. We want to make sure that we are captivating youth populations' interest, whatever concerns they already have. Because I think we've been talking a lot today about like, kind of which is very important. But getting the idea of people who have ideas, who are actively engaged in climate activism or education or whatever in these spaces. But a big part of my experience has been working with people who might have a climate apathy right now. And so how we get to engaging those people who would otherwise never even engage with environmental health issues is addressing the concerns that they already have and then thinking about environmental health solutions. For example, one way I've been thinking about this recently is so I volunteer also in Mattapan, a neighborhood in Boston, with similar to Hyde Park with environmental justice communities, and thinking about how, for example, if community members, they talk with EPA representatives and they discuss, we really want more accessible higher education quality opportunities. That's not a concern that seems necessarily related to environmental justice, but when we think about the way quality of schools is connected to zoning practices from the 20th century. And we think about how we can provide and scholarships for these people so that they can provide, they could be related to environmental health and environmental education, environmental sector jobs. But in general, addressing these people's concerns and then putting climate friendly or environmental related solutions on them so that, yes, they feel like they're actually being listened to, and they're not just being talked at, and that we can also engage them in climate spaces, or specifically towards their health and climate activism, which would be like, in that example, directing them to environmental health scholarships or environmental sector jobs. If the community members come and say, hey, we're struggling to pay bills and we need better jobs to pay for these bills, then we can encourage them to, for example, if we had an expansion of these Tic-Tac resource centers, such that there was a physical presence somehow, it could be at grocery stores somehow in every environmental justice community, they could get those resources to find those jobs that they're looking for. So thank you.
Thank you. And now for our last remarks, I'll hand it over to Kiera.
Thanks, Gabriel. Just wanted to do a little bit of summary for the group here. As you can see, youth are engaged on such a wide range of issues here. And I would encourage this administration to take a very expansive view as what's qualified as a youth issue. I think it's very easy to look at why climate is a youth issue. We obviously, as young people with the most life ahead, have a lot at stake. It is our world to inherit. It's our world now. And I think that there is a temptation often to look at issues of the future when you think about youth. But I encourage you, and I guess I point to all of my fellow council members here today and say, we can handle the detail. We want to engage. We want to take an expansive definition of what issues are ours to handle. So I guess just a quick thank you to this administration for things like the Inflation Reduction Act that are wide-ranging, that have the potential to remake this entire landscape. And I would say to look to us for that implementation, for that future. We want to be involved. We want to push this agenda forward because it is our world to inherit. So thank you very much for your time, and back over to Gabriel, or to Carissa, sorry, for some remarks.
Thank you, Kiera. I think with that, we'll look to you, Administrator Regan, if you want to provide closing remarks.
Yes, and number one, thank you all for this discussion. This is amazing. And although I took some basic notes here, I think my team probably took better notes, and I'm excited to really digest a little bit more many of the things that were said here today. I'm also just excited to see how over the next couple of months, all these ideas come through a report or something that we can really see something tangible, grab onto it, and we all sort of work from the same principles and priorities. I think that one of the things that struck me that Paige said is that maybe not those in this room, but young people are not hearing enough that they have the power to change. And I think you all represent and embody the notion that we at EPA absolutely believe that young people have the power to change. And we do fall into these traps of using rhetoric that some think are action oriented, like climate crisis, and creates this anxiety, and anxiety is supposed to create movement and momentum. That's the opposite effect of what you all are articulating to us. And I think it was also important to hear sort of the intellectual articulation of why it's important to have a very tight message for young people. I think a lot of times folks feel like, oh, well, young people are not interested or have short attention spans. Therefore, we don't want to use cheap tricks to reach them. And so there's a disconnect in terms of how and why we decide to do what we do to reach young people. So there's just a lot of information coming in from you all today that I'm just taking to heart and really have taken some notes on. Having these conversations in abstract, not having community members or young people bought in, looking at inclusivity and meeting people where they are, the importance of you all being plugged into all levels of government as they try to solve some of these problems. This is very good feedback and information. And to be honest, what I would like for my team to do is sort of dig into a few things in terms of what has been discussed today, because the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act has put billions of dollars on the table to begin solving some of these issues. And I'll just be very frank with you all, and I am very much receiving the charges that you all are giving to me. So I'm going to give you one too, because this is a partnership and there's an equal responsibility here. In your respective communities, many of your elders have advocated for certain structures. And so the agency is communicating with your communities through your elders' viewpoints that are very different from yours. And so we're going to need for you all to sort of push that up through your respective communities, have that family discussion so that as you come to the federal government for these resources, we are actually meeting you all where we need to meet you all, and whether that's some of the environmental justice elders who are advocating specifically for how we address ports in New Jersey and the $5 billion for ports in New Jersey. The question is, are you included in those conversations? Are you actively talking to Dr. Nikki Sheets as we think about how we engage our indigenous communities, and we think about how we do consultation and how we think about indigenous culture and education? The question is, are we building those gaps with the elders, or are we building the gaps with the elders and the youth to make sure that these are comprehensive approaches? You know, I've heard a number of references to the TIC-TACs and the technical centers. I think we've done our best to design those, but we need for you all to drive people to those technical centers and tell the technical centers exactly what young people need to hear and see to be competitive for these grants. So it is sort of there's a foot race here, right? And we don't have time to waste. We have billions of dollars. We have somewhat structured programs designed to push these billions of dollars to communities. And now we need for communities aren't monolithic. So even in one community, as we're discussing here, young people have a very different opinion of how others might have in that community. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is prepared to disseminate resources to multiple layers in one community. And we need to make sure that as we're trying to do that, we are effectively communicating to all layers in these various communities. That's a really big challenge for a government agency, but it's not so daunting if I know that you all are signing up for a full-fledged partnership to help us ensure that the right people get access to these billions of dollars. And if they do, we're going to see a massive change, not just in infrastructure, but education, communication, and basically how this economy works, how we revolutionize our technologies in a way where it's not just for our urban communities, but our rural communities are leading as well. As we think about the appropriate way to make these transitions that are beneficial and sensitive to all of our different cultures and communities. I think one of the most important things is making sure that you all are in the driver's seat. You all have a very daunting task as well, because you're sitting around the table very optimistic, very informed, enlightened, and ready to go. And your generation doesn't have quite as much gas in the tank and aren't as optimistic, aren't hearing the things. So what I want to say is I'm leaving here with a big assignment, and I think you all are too. The charge questions is one thing that's focused on these three topics, but how we do it, how we implement, how we execute, how we reach people, that's where you start to see these layers of complexity on top of just trying to, in a very intellectual way, ensure we're all talking about the same topics. So you all have a big task. We have a big task, but I think as you're seeing from yesterday and today, we are dedicating agency resources to demonstrate to you all we are very serious about not just listening to you all and your generation, but bringing you into the fold and making sure that we put our time, attention, and resources into actionable items that actually deliver on the promises that, quite frankly, you all are making to your peers. So I just want to say thank you for taking this time, and thank you for signing up for what I see to be not only a historic, but a very serious assignment for you and your generation.
Thank you, Administrator Regan. We appreciate your words, appreciate you joining us today. I also want to thank the council members for sharing your reflections, your comments, especially on the presentations we heard yesterday. And I know having working with the council since they were accepted this challenge, I know they are up for all these tasks and assignments and definitely ready to jump into getting the work started. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn for 15 minutes and we'll return here in your seats at 10:15 in person and then of course in your seats virtually. Thank you. All right. With that, again, welcome back, everyone. We are going to be moving into our next part of the agenda, which is a discussion for the neyac members on the charge questions and their work group assignments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the neyac chairs, Gabriel Nagel and Kira O'Brien.
Thank you so much, Carissa. So we just finished our discussion with the administrator, which I think went really well. We heard from Colton and Nick on issues facing rural communities and agriculture, Rachel and Alex on specifically how it's impacting their communities in Alaska and also sacrifice zones that communities are facing. And we also heard from Asada and Lizette on environmental justice, Regana and Paige on crucial issues like climate justice, and some of our virtual participants as well, like Emmanuel and Osenaga on specifically improving education around these issues. So now we're going to enter more of an informal discussion on what specific information we're going to need on these charged questions. And we're also going to talk about some of the issues that are directly impacting our communities. So to start us off, we're going to go around with each member sharing the top 3 impacts that their communities are facing that they would like to focus on. So this doesn't have to be anything that you prepared in advance, but instead more of an informal discussion. And I'll hand it over now to Kiera to start us off.
Sure. Thank you, Gabriel. As he said, I think we're going to have it be a little bit more of a looser format. This is more of a casual discussion. We are obviously very grateful for the administrator's time, and now this is more of our internal neyac conversation. So we don't want to put anyone on the spot here. So from my perspective, as somebody from Alaska, coastal erosion is one of the big issues that I worry about a lot for my community, but also energy access. Clean energy access is a growing topic in my hometown. Diversification of the energy portfolio, but also making sure that we have energy supply. Those are some of the big things that I'm thinking about in my community. And I'll turn it over to Alexandra next.
Thank you, Kira. I believe coming from a small island with about 1,500 people in the summer, so even the tourists, it's important from an Indigenous lens to look at how, especially in my community, we're landless. So we don't have land to necessarily protect in the lens of a tribal government. I will also reiterate the coastal erosion and also ocean acidification. And within my career lens, we do lots of solid waste mitigation, including specifically fishing net recycling. The ghost nets are a big thing, especially up in Alaska and along that coasts across the United States, of course. And lastly, I would probably say food scarcity and food sovereignty as well, and being able to also touch back to traditional ways and cultural knowledge around food and the respect and also the skill set around providing for yourself when all of the food from my community that you buy at the grocery store comes in on a barge. It's a really different conversation for communities that are isolated like that. I know up in northern Alaska, sometimes they don't get the barge because of the conditions of the water. And so conversations surrounding unique situations like that too can be brought to the table as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. Rachel?
So, I will say that I also want to back up on the coastal erosion bit. Down in Louisiana, they often say that we lose football fields by the hour. And land loss, coastal erosion, and habitat conversion are huge issues for us, especially as we deal with rising seas and environmental degradation. There's a long history of this happening also from direct human impacts from the oil industry, canal dredging, and petrochemical companies. So these are some of like our top issues where we're dealing with Cancer Alley, chemical corridor, and environmental justice issues, especially as many people in our communities are reliant on these industries for work and jobs. And we have almost a forced reliance on them, but at the same time, we are losing our homelands and we are losing the places that hold so much more value to us and our ways that we live on the land. So seeking out equitable ways to move forward and continue to provide for ourselves and also to maintain that connection. Also there, for us, the plastic pollution issues and even deforestation of like our cypress swamps, they're still largely going on, and it's an issue because that is needed for ecosystem services and other things. So I'd say those are about like my top three.
Thank you, Rachel. Nick?
Thank you, Chair. Some of the ones that come most to mind are ones that were touched upon in our presentations yesterday. A key one is focused on environmental justice and building awareness on communities that are underserved or do face some sort of inequality, and that they are in a position where they can seek to right the wrongs that they may be experiencing on a daily basis. Within Region 7, we have certain communities that are disadvantaged and have historically been so, and yet they either don't have the awareness or the access to resources in order to be advocating for themselves in order to be making that sort of a change. And so building that awareness, I think, is a first and foremost priority. A second one is enabling those that do understand and want to make a difference and providing them with with not just the resources, but more so how to access those resources. And it's certainly encouraging to hear yesterday about how the EPA has been promoting these efforts and been willing to catalyze the ability of concerned citizens to make a difference, whether it's applying to grants or looking for technical or regulatory support for their organizations in order to create those difference, to right those justice wrongs that they might have otherwise experienced. A third major one is within Region 7 in the Midwest. Farming and agriculture is an incredibly important part of our economy and our part of our culture. And oftentimes, especially within the past few years, we've had several different areas where there might have been misunderstandings between what is environmentally conscious and what is economically feasible and viable for our farmers. And a major component of that is realizing that no farmer wants to intentionally harm the environment, but how we switch to healthier alternatives for the environment, how we seek to let their farms remain economically viable, and how we encourage farmers, whether they're generational or looking to get into the industry in order to run a successful practice, and how we keep the sustainable industry in order to support our nation's goals beyond those of our region as well, is a very important priority for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Colton?
My comments are going to largely follow Nick's, and I commend his for working in the agriculture community as well and talking about food security. I think the big thing in rural and agriculture communities is awareness, right? Droughts and fire out west, mainstream media, government agencies largely focus on how it impacts the population with reducing water usage. They don't talk about the farmers and ranchers that are put out of work, or generations of family land that have provided food and fiber for this country that are not going to be able to continue to do so. So I don't have the data in front of me, but I would imagine rural communities are disproportionately affected by changing weather patterns and climate change, and largely because the politics are still not ready in those local communities to have those conversations. And so I think that's something very much we can lead from the table. I also want to add to Nick's comments on access to the competitive grant funding, but it being an equitable competitive process for rural communities. As those of us who live in rural communities know, whether it be from the nonprofit sector or the public sector, that we have less manpower, less specialty in grant ascertainment. And so we're naturally put at a disadvantage because we don't have the type of public or private funds to support those efforts. The other thing I want to talk about related to our charge questions is zero emission vehicle adoption and deployment. I think it's very key in rural communities and those in agricultural interests that the agency looks at working in tandem with the private sector. Right? We talk about new provisions being put in place by 2027 in these things. So for younger farmers and ranchers getting involved, there's not a large market for heavy duty electric trucks that can haul cattle to market. So people get a check at the end of the month. There's not a whole lot of access to electric tractors that can run more than 10 hours a day to support the food and fiber of this nation. So from my perspective, the things we're talking about, it's not just insecurity when it comes to education on climate matters, but it's truly a national security issue. The old adage goes, and you may need a doctor, a lawyer a couple times a year. You need a farmer or rancher multiple times a day. And so we've got to make sure that they're provided the knowledge and access where EPA is working with them, not against them, so that we can move forward in an equitable manner and actually make real change and find solutions to the problems we face.
Thank you, Colton. Asada, over to you.
Thank you. When I think about the concerns in my community, and you're always going to hear me echo this, we suffer from terrible air quality from the cumulative impacts of the industrial facilities, the port, the airport, everything, right? So we are really concerned with making sure we are pushing forward and on the path to zero emissions, making sure that our rules, our regulations, and our standards are as strong as possible so that we are protecting our communities from further harm from these emissions. I do want to give a shout out to the EPA because they did just finalize stronger standards for the harmful soup pollution. And we can be doing so much more. We need to be making sure our greenhouse gas rules are stronger. We are pushing forward with the electrification, as Colton mentioned. Another thing I want to echo Nick in raising the awareness and being able to access resources. It's really important that we are emphasizing the education pieces as Megana talked upon, because when you educate the community, we are aware, and so we're able to use these tools to advocate better for ourselves. We know what's going on already. We already are experiencing the conditions that we are going through, and so when we have that education piece, we are also learning about the terminology, some of the policies, all different sources to make sure that we are uplifting our communities. And then another issue is making sure that we meet people where they are. You know, a lot of times in our communities, marginalized communities, we're worried about whether we have access to food, whether or not we're going to get, we're taking care of our family members. There's a lot of things that's happening in our personal lives that we're not always going to think about the environmental justice or the climate change or the circular economy first. So we have to meet people where they are. We have to make sure when we're doing these grant funding, make sure they're going through communities so that when we have programs, we're being able to incentivize people, letting them know that their time is valuable, providing that funding, providing opportunity to say, hey, we are providing meals at this meeting so that we are feeding our community, meeting them where they are. We're providing transportation to these meetings, to these sources of programs and education pieces. So I think that is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Asada. Lizette?
Similar to what my fellow members have said, I think education and resources are very important. I'm from Chicago and it's a very diverse city. There's definitely a lot going on in terms of environmental injustices. And I think a lot of people are unaware, especially those that face it the most, these injustices the most. I don't think people are aware and don't have the education or the resources to truly understand what is happening. For example, last week, it was 70 degrees in February, and a lot of people, you'll hear them say, oh, this is amazing, like the weather is nice, but not understanding that there's more to it than just a nice day. 70-degree day in February in Chicago. It's actually pretty bad. So I think the education piece and reaching people, especially the frontline communities, is vital to being able to demand for better, more equitable and access to resources. And I think another thing that's an environmental justice issue, especially not just Chicago, but major cities across the country. Equitable parks. Did you guys hear that? Equitable parks. And usually there's parks in certain neighborhoods that are not accessible or equitable or even just closed down because of where they're located or who is in those neighborhoods. And they're placed by hazard or waste facilities. And I think being able to promote equitable parks is an environmental justice issue that I would like to see change for my Chicagoans, but also cities across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizette. Megana?
Thank you, Kira. So I think, I already touched on a lot of the important issues that my community in Houston faces in our earlier discussion. But I think that one thing that we really need to work on when we're looking at environmental education is making it more relatable to youth in specific communities. So for example, students in Houston would have a lot different experiences than, students from rural communities across Texas. And I think it's important that when you look at environmental education, you're bringing in issues that students in these areas can relate to, and so they have a bigger connection to the issue and ultimately want to learn more about it. And I think another thing that's really important to recognize, I know I've touched on this so much, is that, for example, in Houston specifically, like we've relied on the oil industry for decades. And so that's not a practice or mentality that can easily be shifted just like by posting a couple of social media reels or, giving people in those areas like the resources that they need to change. You have to convince them that it's worth it to change. So I think that's something that really needs to be worked on in a lot of these centers that we're spreading across the country, like the TikToks, teaching these people in the communities that not only is it worth it to change, but it's actually better if we change right now, because it's really hard to change the, I guess, economic mentality that a lot of these industry heavy cities have had for decades. And so I think that's something that really needs to be focused on.
Thank you, Megana. Paige?
I'm going to reiterate a lot of what has already been said, especially about awareness, but awareness and access to resources is so important. I mean, we heard yesterday when we were here for like a few hours, there are so many resources that specifically the EPA has, but also just generally the federal government. But the real issue is like, how do you get those to the right people? How do you get people to know that this is available so that if you need help or if you need resources, you can use this? So like creating them is definitely difficult, but it's also like, I would say it's almost harder to make sure that it's getting to the right places so that it's actually being used effectively. And also Magana just talked about this, but like, how do you engage as many people as possible in environmental issues, especially youth? Like you need education, you need to connect people to the issues, because a lot of people, if you're not specifically in a community where it seems like obvious that you were particularly like affected by environmental issues, like a lot of people my age are kind of just like, oh, like I'm not affected by it, like it doesn't matter. Like everyone's affected by it. The whole world is affected by it. There's just different ways, and you have to connect people to that and let them know like, okay, these are ways that your own community is being affected by it. And I mean, you might not even notice because it's just how like you've grown up if you really didn't notice that that was happening around you. So it's important to make sure that people know that this is an issue and there are a bunch of ways that it's being implemented. And sometimes it's hard to even like understand how environmental issues are like being implemented in the world just by nature, because it is so widespread and so ingrained in our world. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Paige. Over to Gabriel to close it out.
Thank you, Kiera. So I think this has been echoed by a lot of other council members, but specifically on the topic of environmental justice, I think it's critical that we start addressing how it's impacting youth specifically. So in Colorado, one thing that has recently been occurring is a decreased snowpack. So there's been a 23% drop of snow from 1955 to 2023 levels, and that's directly reducing the water supply that many people in Colorado have, and also worsening droughts, and then that makes wildfires more likely in intensity and frequency. So all of these issues combine. And one striking example of the way that this impacted youth was actually 2 years ago. I remember being in school, and then I got an announcement during these massive heat waves, and there was also poor air quality, that one day school was actually canceled because our high school didn't have sufficient air conditioning equipment to keep up the temperature to a safe level. So this is directly impacting youth and then putting struggles on people who are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis to begin with. Because then parents who might have to work then have to stay home with their kids. So a lot of these issues are very interconnected. And then a secondary issue that I think would be critical to focus on is environmental education. And this was explained a little bit by Magana and also Paige. I think environmental education right now is quite abstract. Students learn about climate change and the impact that it's having, but oftentimes, I mean, at least speaking personally, I was left feeling more overwhelmed than empowered to take action. So tailoring environmental education to the specific problems that a community is facing, and also providing specific action items and points that students can take in their community would be critical. I think these are my top two kind of areas right now that I'm seeing in Colorado, but of course there's many other issues that are relating to these charged topics. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Kiera to begin a discussion on our reflection of our meeting with the administrator this morning.
Thanks, Gabriel. So just to give this a bit of structure, we have 45 to 50 minutes left allotted for this conversation. And so I think it would be great first to go around and, as Gabriel just said, reflect on our chat with the administrator earlier, but also provide any reflections you have on the presentations from yesterday. We got a lot of information, thanks to the EPA. So any reflections you'd like to provide on the 4 presentations we heard. We did have that first presentation on EPA jurisdiction and process as well. So this would be a good time to reflect on those experiences. But then after that, after we complete kind of a go around on that, we can read out the charge questions issued by each office that gave us a presentation, and then assess whether or not we will need any additional information in order to answer those charge questions. So if that sounds good, we can start with some reflections on our meeting with the administrator and the presentations from yesterday.
I see actually that Emmanuel has a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if myself as Seneca and Seal have an opportunity to share some of the issues affecting our region as well. Or if we're hopping to the roundtable discussion.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think we lost you halfway.
Oh, I was just wondering if Seneca, Christine, and I will have a chance to share kind of our top issues as well for our regions.
Yes, definitely. We can go to online participants for reflections on the community voices. Would you like to kick that off?
Yeah. So I kind of want to echo a little bit about what Gabriel's talking about. I think climate resilience, I think, is one of the top issues that we're facing here in Region 9. I think particularly with wildfire funding, especially in California and Arizona, where we're having intensifying wildfires. Wildfire seasons are getting longer, and obviously that poses an incredible risk in terms of air quality. And so I think increased investment in prevention and early detection is incredibly vital. Also think I think Asada shares concern as well in terms of air pollution. We have the communities around our ports especially suffer from some of the worst environmental degradation in the country. And that's why I think the transition to electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles, are incredibly important. I'm hoping the EPA can very quickly approve a lot California's waiver and a lot of our requests when it comes to Clean Cars 2 standards, our advanced clean fleet standards that we're hoping to get because we suffer from terrible air pollution. And I think in terms of environmental education, I think empowering our regional offices with the EPA are important. These are folks who are in the communities every day, and they are trusted voices. I think especially with younger people, there is either an apathy when it comes to institutions, or I think when it comes to our undocumented population who typically are younger, I think there is a fear of institutions as well. And I think empowering these regional offices who are, again, people that they are familiar with, that they see, are, I think, is an important piece as well.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Seneca?
Yeah, I actually want to echo a lot of the statements being said. I think specifically for um, representing, again, the interest of science policy communicators focus on the correlation of environmental health and climate change, thinking about how we can communicate this to people who look like me and other communities of color in Boston and the surrounding area. I think the pressing areas are the intangibility of broader climate issues and even local environmental health issues that could be down the street for people who are struggling to pay bills. One of my colleagues, Judith Foster, who's an environmental leader in Boston, she said something to me that, has always stuck with me when she said, when you're trying to you come down from the government, you're trying to talk to people about climate change and consequences and environmental health hazards that are plaguing them. And it's like, they can't see you, they can't hear you. And how should we blame them for it? Because, when we're human beings. And if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs or any of these, just any fundamental psychological theory about human desires, there's a certain amount of foundational level of things to be addressed before we get to those pressing issues like climate change, which are, that require a sense of capacity, or a great sense of capacity in the mind and also your ability to act. The second big issue or actually in response to that, a solution I think, or I'd love to talk about more, is the empowering local community organizations, especially as trusted partners for the expansion. I kind of want to see like a network of Tic Tacs rather than just 16. And at least seeing like their more involvement in trusting local community organizations and, the discussion of how they're trusted. I think that's tough in itself because there's often an age dynamic there, a power dynamic, but that's just one thing I'm thinking about. Climate resilient buildings, that's like issue number two. I've been really interested in talking about the urban heat island effect and, the lack of diminishing green space and what that does during the summers. Boston's a very old city with a lot of brick buildings, and it was not built to take, the weather that we're seeing in the summer in terms of the heat. And the result of that is a lot of heat stroke in specific concrete jungles in the city and surrounding communities, often communities of color. And so that's a big issue, I think, facing my community. And so it's very important for the mitigation of concrete jungles and the protection of environmental green spaces and other resources that will help alleviate those issues. I think there's been a little bit of cognitive dissonance between like local government and broader government, where it's like we made public commitments saying that, oh, environmental sustainability is something that we're committed to, but then there's like unsustainable development happening in like the Seaport region of Boston. Those who are familiar understand that's like a very commercially desired area. And so it's Boston has a problem with sea level rise. And so it's like there's this issue of what we say we're going to do and what we're actually doing. And yeah, I'll leave it there. That's all for me.
Thank you. Anyone else online but off camera that would like to contribute here? Seeing none, shifting back to the roundtable, anyone with reflections on our conversation with the administrator or the presentations from yesterday, back to the standard format of please raise your hand or your tent card and turn on your microphone if you would like to speak. Starting with Magana.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about what Paige and the administrator both brought up with like the attention spans of youth now. So I think it's not just important to kind of say, oh, like, how am I going to get their attention? But how is it something that they keep coming back to, like the content that the EPA is producing? How do you make it something that young people want to come back and watch and are waiting for an update on the page? And so I think that something that's really important is not just making it more hopeful and less pessimistic, but also making it like turning the issue, I don't want to say entertaining because that's not the right word, but something that, like youth are excited to watch, like something about, what the EPA is doing that genuinely interests youth. And so I think looking at those issues and kind of targeting them towards specific regions, like I talked about, not every young person can relate to every single issue affecting every single community. And so while broad education is important, I think like a great social media strategy would be to focus, I don't know, maybe do kind of a weekly thing where we focus on specific regions. It could even be the EPA Youth Council's regions, and maybe like the EPA Youth Council could do something where we kind of like go out and show the issues that are affecting our communities, but make it in a way so people in these regions can not only relate to it, but want to learn more. And so I think that's the most important thing, because like Paige said, right now, youth's attention spans only last like 10 to 13 seconds, but 10 to 13 seconds isn't enough for them to, learn what they need to learn and be more involved. So it has to be something that attracts them in, that's 10 to 13 seconds, but then whatever it is should be so exciting that they go on their own to learn more about it. And so I think that's what is really important. And that's what we kind of talked about a little bit in the roundtable with the administrator.
Thanks, Megana. Nick?
A key takeaway that I've kind of been reminiscing on or just been thinking about that the administrator mentioned was the task that he conferred upon us, which was, go out into our communities and figure out ways to promote kind of these grassroots initiatives and ways that we can really meet the EPA where they're at. I think all of us have touched a lot on how maybe the EPA can meet youth where we're at, in terms of whether it's outreach, whether it's education, whether it's awareness. But I think it is important for us to also to be considering about how do we meet the EPA where they're at. They've shown that they clearly want to have an outreach. They want to have a productive relationship with marginalized communities, including youth. They've established the Tic Tacs in order as a potential solution to address an issue that has been recognized about how do we really get these resources to the people that need it the most. And so I guess maybe thinking about ways that we can start connecting individuals with those resources from our level too. How do we make individuals aware that the EPA is working across numerous different industries, and it's up to us as individuals in order to educate ourselves on the basics of these industries? How do we share the EPA's mission in a way that enables them to take advantage of these resources in a productive manner? And part of that too is, becoming more competitive, whether it is the grant process or other sorts of initiatives. It's great that we have the opportunity. At the same time, meeting with the EPA also requires, a mutual understanding that youth in impoverished communities have daily lives and other responsibilities that they need to engage with in order to survive. They don't necessarily have these sustainability efforts as part of their full-time job or their economic livelihoods. And so I guess trying to figure out ways that we can begin thinking about how do we meet the EPA where they're at, because they have taken a first step in trying to reach us where we're at. And so having that mutual partnership will especially be important over the course of this term.
That's great, Nick. And I like where you're touching on what the administrator was focusing on about how this is a true partnership. I think that's something we should all take to heart in our deliberations going forward. Over to Paige.
I just wanted to bounce off of what Megana just talked about, because we were both talking about similar topics, but I think the relatability kind of aspect that you brought up for social media is really important. I mean, it can seem kind of like funny of making environmental topics relatable, but especially youth can feel very like separate and almost like different from especially like older generations who are many times like heading all of these like environmental topics and things. And especially with the federal government, it can kind of feel like an abstract topic when they are just like posting about like issues, then making it like relatable and fun to talk about, like not just like so cynical and negative. It's exhausting to only hear negative stuff all of the time. So making it more relatable and interesting to people can really help people understand more about the issues and understand that it isn't just some abstract concept. It's something that they can actually engage with and that is affecting them and that they can also change.
Thanks, Paige. Anyone else with some reflections? Rachel?
So in reflecting on the charge questions and the presentations that we were given yesterday, I would like to point out perhaps more of a focus on the plastic pollution that they mentioned during the food waste presentation, and maybe going forward on how we address that. So plastic pollution is a huge issue, especially for coastal communities who are left with the burden of it coming into our areas. This is a huge source of marine pollution and bioaccumulation within our seafoods and other foodways surrounding that. It also, as we're seeing microplastics break down and bioaccumulate within these areas, and we're also seeing it bioaccumulate in ourselves, and we're starting to see disease processes coming out of this. So it's also further harming endangered species that live within our oceans and around the world, such as the Gulf of Mexico rice's whales and loggerhead sea turtles and others. So when we talk about this, I'd like to see like us begin to talk about solutions to perhaps moving away from plastic as single use or otherwise packaging, and moving towards technologies that are coming out that are both biodegradable, safe for the environment, or compostable and able to be recycled back within our own communities. Also, when we're talking about encouraging local food systems and thought processes around seasonal eating and native plants that can handle the environmental changes in the places that they are native to, climate change or droughts or flood processes such as those, and maybe changing the idea of what food in our areas look like. Do we need something that isn't technically in season for the area it is, or can we simply go to foods that we can grow in our area that are appropriate for the season and then reduce food waste and how long it lasts through those things as well. Also, when we were talking about the climate change presentation, looking for solutions that truly work and not creating in our minds a sense of a false solution. I know one thing that stood out to me when we were talking about clean buses was LNG being listed as a clean fuel source for those buses. And where I live, that is not necessarily true. We have a huge issue with LNG ports being built out, disturbing our environments and creating huge petrochemical issues, especially in regards to air quality and habitat destruction. So when we're looking at more equitable solutions moving forward, what can we look at and consider as, well, this isn't truly a cleaner energy. This has long-lasting impacts in other areas that are we sacrificing for that fuel source. And simply moving forward on things like that and what other technologies are available and that we can continue to move forward as we develop them. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Colton?
Sure. So I'd just like to add conversation specifically about the TIC tax or the service centers for folks in the audience that aren't aware of the acronym. I think the real key thing here, and it was brought up by one of our colleagues virtually, is that we've got to bring local community groups together to meet as a local working group, whether, you know, the EPA administer that on a monthly or quarterly or even semi-annually basis. So you have representatives from the community at the table specifically talking about things. One thing I know personally from my work with USDA, specifically with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, or the conservation districts across the country, is communities that have been marginalized or have a deep foundational distrust of the government at any level are not going to go just wander into a government building one day seeking help. And we learned yesterday about the literal billions of dollars in grants that are here to represent our communities. But if we cannot properly educate underserved communities and the youth community, which we're here representing, on how to achieve and obtain that source of funding, that funding is going to go to interest groups that make it through the door. And we had good conversation about that yesterday. We can't just go in and expect folks to know how to acquire the funding if we as a council don't understand that process. And so I would recommend it in a follow-up meeting, virtually or in person, we get a real in-depth look at the grant making process here at EPA. We get a real in-depth look at the regulatory process here at EPA. Because as President Johnson, a great Texan, once said, power is where power goes. We have power in representing our communities and our constituencies by serving on this advisory council to learn what goes on here in the agency and how it affects the interests that we were selected and appointed by the administrator to represent. but it's collectively also our job to then go back into our communities and spread that message so we can be that tenant to get people into the door to start using the government services that their hard-earned tax dollars pay for.
Thank you, Colton. Osenega?
I really want to emphasize what Colton said. I think it's a very important topic adjacent to all of this, or really undermining or underlying a lot of this is historical mistrust or a lack of trust in government agencies. I know that's something that is facing a lot of community members where I'm from in Boston. And um, I'll talk quickly about just how I think we can, as Colton was just saying as he was wrapping up, how we can think about representing the change that we want to see. I think based off of the administrator's remarks and what we've been talking about, I think the onus is on us a little bit to represent the EPA and talk about how there are these grants and there are these programs available for people in our communities. I mean, a big part of it is, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but increasing physical presence. But I think, like Colton's saying, we can be that physical presence ourselves. I think even though we are new to this, or at least, I mean, I'll speak for myself and I can say I'm not like, affiliated with the EPA before, I can say that I have to be the one who's humble, open, and transparent to be like, that super fun site that we're now cleaning up. There's the EPA logo on the little poster, like saying that, oh, we were a part of this. Like, let's be creative about how we can be. The acronym is HOTS, humble, open, and transparent with community members so that they understand that you're, generations of mistrust, your concerns are valid. And we're the same agency. I mean, think about how we sound when we come to our community members with these grants and programs. And we're the same, or this is the same agency that we're representing now, where for many of these communities, they signed off a letter saying, yeah, to a certain company saying you could pollute, you could do this. So we have to be honest in how we represent the agency in all types, not just the good things it's done, but also the legacies of bad things it's co-signed. So, and that's just that on that piece of how we're gonna have to take probably some pushback or whatever for community members because we want to help them. We also have to address their concerns with mistrust. And then I really want to talk about plastic, an issue dear to me. I did a short standalone podcast series with my mom's Clean Air Force last summer on it. And I definitely want to make sure that we're thinking about how we can, as Rachel's talking about, moving towards alternative futures for plastic, but also capping and reducing plastics production. That could look like stopping the subsidizing of new and expanded petrochemical facilities and banning the most toxic polymers and plastic chemicals, as well as also like increasing the technical compliance of many of the virtual pipeline for petrochemical feedstocks. As we hear about what happened in Ohio with the train derailment last year, many concerns related, or there were many concerns from the community members and just people looking at the situation about how those were feedstocks to a plastic production company. So just thinking about how these are very tangible environmental health hazards with plastic pollution as well. I think when it's not just the microplastics, it's not just the bio or the systems degradation, but we're also thinking about the terrible disasters that can happen when things go wrong in our transport of these feedstocks. So thank you.
Thank you. Over to Alexandra.
I just wanted to circle back to social media real quick. And I know we have some successful influencers on our council, but I can be the one to say is that the EPA can look to these platforms as a good starting point to how we address engagement, and in terms of how we get youth involved. And I know that hopefully, as we work with our council members, they can give us some guidance too on how they became successful in their own social media platforms. I'm not an influencer, but you can follow me if you want to. But I know that I applied for this position through Intersectional Environmentalist and their platform. They advertised it, and that's how I even knew about this position. So going forward, I know that we have some good people on our board and good influencers that are already charging the environmental movement that we can look to not only amplify the minority voices, but also give us a good engagement to the youth.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and for the entire council on those comments. They'll be jotted down in the notes so we could consider them as we move forward. Now for the remainder of the time that we have, which is approximately 30 minutes, we're going to proceed through each of the topics, starting first with environmental justice, moving to climate change, and ending with circular economy. Through each of those topics, we'll read aloud the charged questions. And after reading each section, we will ask all council members for any input on those charged questions to see if those feel answerable, and also if we need any additional information to proceed. We're going to start off with the first topic of climate change. I'll read the first question, which is, the EPA is interested in ensuring that youth in communities with EJ concerns are empowered and connected to the resources EPA is making available to support advancing environmental justice in communities. What barriers to awareness or access exist to empowering and connecting with youth and communities with EJ concerns? How can we make agency resources such as grant programs, technical assistance, etc., more accessible? And what approaches, processes, or strategies would neyac recommend the agency utilize to enhance awareness and access among youth? Moving on, do you want? Okay, yeah, I'll proceed reading the rest of the questions here. So, how can the EPA engage youth in environmental sustainability? How can youth people actively promote innovation and implement sustainable ideas? How would you identify youth's vision for a just and sustainable future? How should EPA work with corresponding state, local, and/or tribal governments to ensure desired impacts in affected communities and to enhance environmental justice? What do youth consider reliable and impactful engagement methods? What are credible indicators of successful engagement? And then the fourth question, what best practices, technologies, and/or platforms are best positioned to connect youth to environmental resources available at the EPA, including but not limited to green space, access, preservation, cleanup efforts, grant opportunities, and policy developing opportunities, particularly for communities with EJ concerns? And finally, what topics relating to environmental justice are most urgent to youth? Having read these questions for environmental justice, I'll turn it over to Kiera.
Thanks, Gabriel. One of the things that I was really appreciative of yesterday in the presentation was establishing a shared understanding of what the working definition for this group is of environmental justice. I think that's a really good framework, kind of level set to have at the very start. My question that I raised, and I guess I'll just raise again for this group because I think it's something that we need to get our arms around, is the work that's already being done by EPA for outreach for state, local, and tribal governments. I think that's information that I would find valuable for answering at least that third question here, to be able to consider what work has already been done, so we can look at what work we need to do additionally going forward, or what recommendations we should be making for additions in that work.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Alexandra.
I will echo Kira in the ability of them to communicate with us about environmental justice with those definitions. And I also appreciated the plethora of resources that they provided for us. And I think that the one question that I would raise would be in terms of engagement and with youth and in communities, what has been tried that didn't work, and why didn't it work? If it's known why it didn't work, you know, it would be helpful to know going forward what exactly has been already tried. And so I think that's what I would like to know.
Thank you. Colton.
Sure. So I just want to concur with Kira's comments. I think we really need, can we answer these questions for the bulk? Yes. And I think we're all very excited to do the hard work and collaborate to do so. I think we need to get further information on the communication strategies and processes of engagement that EPA is doing. And then back to aforementioned comments, we really need a deep dive on the grant and regulatory processes so we can see how it directly impacts our folks, and we can, like I said previously, meet our folks where they are to address those situations and serve and support that communication effort.
Thank you so much, Colton. So we'll move forward knowing that we will work to, oh, so sorry, Nick.
I'd just like to second Colton's statement on the importance of getting insight into the grant making process. I think an additional component of it too is look at not only just, what's failed and what opportunities have failed, but also who are the individuals and who are the organizations that are competitive for these grants? Who are the ones that have been awarded what sums of money and what sort of impact have they been able to have? I'm very curious to see how many of them have gone to youth organizations. Yesterday, we were told that there isn't any bias against youth organizations, but maybe that's just an explicit bias. And what sort of implicit hurdles might youth encounter and other disadvantaged community members in order to be able to actually access and utilize these grants to their fullest?
Thank you, Nick. And for our final comment on these questions for environmental justice, I'll hand it over to Megana.
So I'd like to talk about the second question, where it's how can the EPA engage youth in environmental sustainability? So I think that I've talked about this a lot, but one of the best ways is through like our formal education system. So I think that one thing that I'd really like clarification on is, how involved can the EPA get with state environment or state education agencies and then the Department of Education in general? Like how can we create some kind of formal education plan that schools can either try to utilize or ask the EPA for help, because I know that there are definitely states that want to get that kind of climate justice curriculum in, and then there are states that don't really want to do that. But just how we can work with different state departments when it comes to education and like a more formal education system rather than just using, like outreach and social media.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to Kiera now to enter the second topic of climate.
Thanks, Gabriel. So I'll read the charge questions for the climate topic, and then we can go back around with any sort of feedback or additional information that we're going to need from EPA in order to answer these questions. So the first question, is the agency's regulatory process sufficiently transparent for meaningful, effective engagement with youth, EJ, and other communities? Second question, what are areas of interest to youth communities that EPA should engage on? What are the most pressing issues in your communities that the agency should focus on or prioritize? Third question, what does success look like for neyac? What data or metrics would the group use, if any, to identify successful outcomes of the neyac engagement? Opening the floor for any, okay, Asada.
Speaking to the first question on is the agency's regulatory process sufficiently transparent or meaningful, transparent for meaningful, effective engagement with youth, I definitely want to echo Colton's sentiment and having us doing a deeper dive into what those regulatory processes are, so that we are fully equipped to understand what the process is and how we can further enhance that process and what that means specifically towards the youth. I think that's important because we know that it's affecting our communities, but we really want to highlight our experiences as youth and make sure that this process is inclusive and productive for us. And then for the last question involving metrics, I think it will also be helpful to know what metrics are in place already so that we can build upon those. We don't want to, recreate the wheel or start from scratch. We want to build upon what has already been done and make sure we are advancing and enhancing these processes that are already in place, and then making sure that based on this, we can alter to make sure it inclusively and effectively helps us and making sure we're successful as a advisory council.
Thanks, Asada. Colton?
I'd like to cover the third question. What does success look like for us and data or metrics used? I know we've kind of all had these conversations off the record, and I'll be the one that openly states it. Our generation with the government or modern media, just in society in general, we're finally getting a seat at the table. People are listening to us, but are they acting on it? Right. I'm the oldest member of this Federal Advisory Council, so I won't be here when it rolls into its second term. Many of you likely will be. So when we answer these charge questions, is action actually going to be taken? Or is this performance art where people are going to listen, slap themselves on the back and say, well, we're trying to do something? Because we all know we can't kick this can down the road. The earth and the country are at historic peril with the situations we're facing, from climate change, EJ, and food insecurity. And so for me, success is actually seeing tangible action done when we submit the answers to these charge questions and see that the agency and the entirety of the federal government is working with local stakeholders in our communities to truly make a difference.
Thanks, Colton. Gabriel?
Thank you. I would just add on to what Colton said, in that to me, success for neyac relates to a lot of what Administrator Reagan said, in that it's not just about these charge questions, it's about how we follow through and see how the agency implements them. So I think that's a secondary component of what success look like. And to see that, we need to make sure we take into account the data and metrics of how effectively those charge questions are implemented and how we can measure the success of each of those individual charge questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel. Megana?
I wanted to touch on something that Asada shared yesterday, where she talked about how in her community, I don't remember the exact pollutant that it was, but she mentioned that they had to buy their own tools to kind of measure like pollution levels. And so I think that's something that we should focus on when we're looking at that third question, is kind of identify what areas aren't using any of these data or metrics right now, because then we can't really measure the effectiveness of whatever strategies the neyac decides to implement, if we implement anything that we suggest. So I think that's something that we need to focus on, is measuring like the before and after. So like if we have areas where nothing's being measured before, then we don't really know how effective the strategies we come up with are. So I think that's something that should be considered in the third question.
Thanks, Megana. Nick?
Speaking more to the second question about areas of interest and what issues the agency should focus on or prioritize, I know yesterday it was brought up several times about appropriations and that there's kind of maybe jurisdiction lines about how the EPA can effectively allocate some of the funding and support that it now has available. I'm curious to understand a little bit more about how the office, which was stated as being incredibly large with a number of employees and a number of scopes of work, maybe what does it look like for the EPA to focus on or prioritize a certain issue? Is there a certain amount that is able to be delegated? How fast is a typical program of work? And what could be realistically expected by a certain recommendation in what certain time frame?
Thanks, Nick. Anyone else for comments on the charge questions for climate? Okay, if not, I'll add just a couple thoughts. These questions are rather broad in my view, particularly when compared with the other questions for other topics that we've received. I choose to look at that as an opportunity to answer questions that we want and take these in whatever directions make sense for our working groups. So I would encourage us to start thinking creatively about what questions we want to answer within this rather broad framework. And with that, I will turn it over to Gabriel to talk about circular economies questions.
Thank you, Kiera. Moving on to circular economy, our last topic, I'll begin by reading the charge questions, and then we'll move into a 10-minute discussion on any additional information that we might need again. Starting with the first question, how can EPA and its partners more effectively engage young people to help reduce food waste at home and abroad? The second question, how can EPA's efforts on sustainable management of food be improved to benefit and work for youth? Moving to the third question, How can outreach and education on making the most of food and preventing food from going to waste at home be most effective in disadvantaged communities? What strategies would be the most effective in disadvantaged communities? And finally, the fourth question, what roles can food retailers and food service providers play in helping young people and those living in disadvantaged communities waste less at home? I'll open the floor now to any comments, starting with Nick.
So to these set of charge questions, I kind of have two main thoughts about this. The first one is specifically in regards to disadvantaged communities, specifically working with these sorts of communities within my neighborhood. I've come to understand that some of the challenges that they face and ways to approach those challenges might be very different than what that approach might look like in more affluent and socioeconomically fortunate neighborhoods around the country. And so diversifying that sort of approach is something that I believe is certainly necessary, and there are different avenues to go about that. And so recognizing that difference first and foremost, and the different ways that are, and consulting with groups that have been successful and been working in the space, what are ways that have worked and what are ways that haven't worked, will certainly be essential. I know within our organizations at home, we have spent significant time and resources that sometimes haven't led necessarily to fruition because they weren't necessarily the right approaches to reach the right target demographics that we were really looking at. And the second one was just kind of the distribution of the stakeholders cited within these questions. Questions 1, 2, and 3 focus a lot on what it looks like at home and what it looks like specifically at youth, while there's only really one question that focuses on food retailers and food service providers. And in integrating that sort of approach and recognize that there are other stakeholders involved in this, whether it's the food retailers, whether it's other government agencies that have other avenues of jurisdiction within this space, and realizing, or I guess kind of promoting that sort of collaboration of figuring out multilateral ways of approaching these issues and involving these other stakeholders besides just pinning it on individuals at home is certainly an integral component as well. I know within the space, inside and outside of just only environmental concerns, there are many conversations that are currently ongoing where the EPA could provide additional detail and support some of these efforts on local to national scales all across the board.
Thank you, Nick. Emmanuel?
Yeah, I think in regards to the questions, I felt that the information that was provided was painted a lot in broad strokes, and maybe this is in itself a solution, but I would have liked to think a little bit more information in regards to insights on cultural and regional differences in regards to food waste. I mentioned before in my answer how our undocumented population are kind of some of our youngest population, thinking about like Latino attitudes towards food, for example. There's a huge emphasis on hospitality, and so that often leads to an over preparation of food, and which might inadvertently lead to food waste. And so I think that having that kind of information, I think, will also inform how you do outreach, whether it means doing outreach to religious institutions, cultural centers, community-based organizations. I think it'll lead to, I think, more individualized forms of approach when it comes to different cultural communities or even just regionally, that having that information would be good to know. And if it doesn't exist, that might just be like a solution of collecting some of that information.
Thank you. Next page.
I just wanted to talk about the first charge question of how the EPA and its partners can more effectively engage young people. I would be curious as to know what they have necessarily already tried. What platforms have they tried doing? What have they noticed has worked for various populations of young people? Obviously, we know there's populations within that. What didn't work? What patterns are there between the things that did and did not work for them? I would be more curious to know kind of what was behind what was their goals trying to using whatever they were using, what they have used, and then I would be able to tell them like, okay, how can we more effectively reach out to young people after knowing that?
Next to Colton.
I'd like to learn more about the interagency work and strategies with USDA. I see a lot of overlap in these charge questions about work that's being done in another federal department. So I'm curious to see what the collaboration is there and who's fitting what niche. I think it's really also key when we talk about young people and at home, what type of figuring out, understanding what type of support at the local level is being run through the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. I'll heed to Emmanuel. I think that presentation yesterday was great, but it was very broad strokes. And I think we need a little more specifics on the agency's platform and standpoint when it comes to the circular economy and how that deals with food waste loss and insecurity in the country.
Thank you. Next, Rachel.
So I'm very curious. We talk a lot about disadvantaged communities within these last two questions. And one of my questions pertains to within the food waste chart that they were showing us, they show that household food waste is like one of the primary areas in which it is wasted. I'm curious about the metrics or the data on food waste coming from higher income neighborhoods or communities versus lower income households overall, and how that may be different depending on the areas they're coming from. Is there less food waste in one or the other? And what kinds of food are we seeing wasted? Is it a specific type? Is it mostly plant-based? Is it mostly meat-based? Different things like that, I think, could inform a lot on how we answer some of these questions and how you would approach addressing the food loss as well. And is similar as well for restaurants and the kinds of things that we're addressing there, how that is affected by the price range that they are in, or the socioeconomic kind of politics that go around in that type of area. Again, it also addresses a lot like how we see food as a commodity. When we see food as a commodity rather than as a gift or as a vital resource that we take care of, how are we seeing treated within these different areas?
Thank you so much, Rachel. Are there any additional comments? I'll go ahead and share my perspective on these questions. I think I agree a lot of what the council has said and additional information that we might need. I would also say that in terms of this being the topic of circular economy, it would be interesting to get more information beyond just food, as most of these questions seem to be directed towards solely food, and looking towards other elements of the circular economy that might be beneficial if we're keeping that as the broad topic area. If not, we could consider having the topic area focus more just around food, as that's what it seems these questions are focused around. Are there any additional questions or comments or information that we might need for this topic area? Okay, yes, I see actually one just popped up virtually. Osenaga.
Yeah, it was really quick. I know there was someone who spoke in the public comment period about the possibility of us thinking about getting waivers from or like restaurants that, at the end of the night might have a lot of food and then they end up throwing away. That's something that in the Harvard community is something that's an issue when it comes to feeding Harvard's homeless population. So I was wondering just if we could get more information about like the legal hurdles surrounding that.
Thank you. Next, Kiera.
Thanks, Gabriel. Kind of want to echo what you shared, actually. I agree the questions are rather food focused, but the presentation yesterday had a wide range of information associated with it. One of the things that I noted in there was Save Our Seas 2.0, the piece of legislation that EPA has some implementation duties on. That was something that I worked on when I worked on the Hill. And I think that there's a lot of information that comes with things like that if we are going to be addressing things like plastic pollution, which I know Rachel raised earlier. So yeah, I guess just putting that out there for consideration. The topics are very food focused. I do think there are a wider range of issues associated with circular economy, and curious how we can be creative in addressing those in our working groups.
Absolutely. Next to Rachel.
I do apologize. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I would also like to put forth making a broader, if we can also suggest a broader range of questions that we address within this, including things such as the plastic pollution and how we can change out packaging to be more sustainable or more recyclable, and also focusing more on again, local food economies. I know we talked a lot about reducing like the travel time and how much we ship. And while I don't think that we can get rid of that entirely, if we can put more of an emphasis on how to make local food economies effective, affordable, and working within communities, and how we can see that happen in an equitable way. So aside from just focusing on the food waste itself and it occurring, how can we change the narrative around that?
Thank you. Seeing that we are now at time, we are going to now enter a break period that I'll hand it over to Carissa for, and then we will resume the meeting beginning with a summary of the past day and then also today, and then moving into next steps for the council, as this is really just the beginning of the conversation. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do over the next 2 years.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Kiara. Thank you, everyone, for your great discussion. So yes, we will move into a break. We're going to take a little bit of a longer break. I know some of the folks we have coming in to join us to close out the meeting will be coming shortly thereafter, or right at the time they're expected. So we can break for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, if we could all plan to return by 11:55, and we will reconvene to close out the final meeting. Thank you. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Hope you had a nice, good stretch break there. I am now going to turn the next part of the agenda back over to our neyac chairpersons, Gabriel Nagel and Kira O'Brien, to provide a summary and next steps for the neyac Council.
Thank you so much, Carissa. We finally made it to the last day of NEYAC's first meeting. And with that, I'll be providing a summary of what we've accomplished over the past 2 days, and then I'll hand it over to Kiara for next steps. Starting off on yesterday, we heard from Janet McCabe, EPA's Deputy Administrator, on the importance of youth involvement within NEYAC. Then we received an educational overview from the EPA and received information on the organization's structure, mission, and how NEYAC fits within that framework. We heard about environmental justice as our first topic, hearing from the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, specifically on the charge questions that they assigned to us. After that, we were able to learn about climate change, which is our second topic, and directly from the Office of Air and Radiation, focused on how we can advance both environmental justice and reductions in carbon emissions and improving air quality across the United States. And then we heard with our final topic of the circular economy from the Office of International and Tribal Affairs, the Office of Land and Emergency Management, and the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery. In this presentation, we learned about the circular economy in a variety of different aspects, including plastic pollution to food waste. Now that we've been assigned these 3 different topics, we went into a further discussion with the EPA administrator this morning and over the past hour to see how we are planning to address these topics and what additional information we'll need. Over the next coming months, EPA will work in order to ensure that NEYAC council members can contribute their perspectives to each of these different charged topics and questions. I think it's important to recognize that this is just the beginning of our work. This is just the start of the conversation. And the work that we put into NEYAC is going to be defined by the hard questions that we both are answering and the questions that we ask to each other. Each of us was chosen for this council for a reason, and we all have a unique perspective to bring and a community to represent. I think it relates to what I think Colton said earlier and a few other members, in that as members of NEYAC, we are not only representatives of the EPA, but we are also representatives of our community. In doing so, we can ensure that we are able to connect with the issues that our community are facing directly to the EPA so that we can provide support to them and the people who are most in need of that support. Now I'll be handing it over to Kiera, who will talk about the next steps for over our next 2 years on this council, and then we will be closing the meeting pretty soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel. As Gabriel said, this is just the beginning, which means these presentations are a starting point, not an ending point. In order to do the work that is expected of us, we will be breaking into 3 different working groups. These working groups are going to mirror the presentations that we have heard from over the past day in terms of topic. And we will be doing the bulk of the work in these structures. Assignments, I believe, have already been handed out to neyac members or are coming soon. And yeah, we will be doing that work with an eye towards a next convening in the summer. Back over to you, Carissa.
Thank you, Kiera. I'm going to hold. Do we have our final guest speak? In the meantime, while we wait for our closing remarks, I'll just go ahead and provide a few housekeeping reminders. The public comment period will remain open until 11:59 Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, March 14th. This ensures that you all as the public have a chance to comment, submit feedback on the presentations, the discussions that you heard today. So again, those comments can be submitted to the public docket on regulations.gov or directly to the neyac email address. That's neyac@epa.gov. We will also be working to ensure that the agenda and all of the meeting material presented today will be available on the neyac website, as well as uploaded into the public docket. Additionally, as highlighted at the beginning of today's discussion and yesterday, we are taking minutes of this meeting, both to yesterday and today. The minutes will be include a description of the matters discussed and the conclusions reached by the neyac members. The minutes of this meeting will be available through the neyac website, as well as the public docket in the coming weeks. As Kiera has mentioned, we're looking at the next meeting being scheduled for later this summer. A notice of the exact dates and times, as well as location, will be issued in the Federal Register notice, and this will be posted on the neyac website. Again, as similar to the way this Federal Register notice was issued, it will be issued 15 days prior to that meeting. Running a bit ahead of schedule, so I think we will do a nice go around. If each of the council members want to reflect on your thoughts, feedback of today's discussion, and of course yesterday's meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Kiera and Gabriel to do a round robin.
Sure. Yeah, as Carissa said, I think this is a nice opportunity for us to just reflect on what we heard over the past couple of days at an individual level, and maybe talk a little bit more about what we are excited to dig in on over the next few months and years to come. Colton, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you again, Colton Buckley, Gatesville, Texas, representing rural and agricultural communities on the neyac. It's been great to visit with everyone and really dive into the important and fundamental work the Environmental Protection Agency is doing, and specifically how we can better engage and implement these charge questions, but also broad strokes effectively on how the agency and the federal government as a whole can address our generation as the baton of leadership and activism and community development are being passed to us. So proud and just really honored to represent the rural and agricultural communities of the United States and work with all of you as we begin to break out into the working groups to put reporting together and responses to these charge questions, and look forward to an exciting full 2 years with everyone.
Great. Thank you, Colton. To you, Nick, now.
Nick Blumenthal from Sioux City, Iowa, representing food security interests. I'm really encouraged by and enlightened just by the sheer amount of information that we've had presented to us over the past few days. I think we've gained a thorough understanding, or at least an initial thorough understanding, of how the EPA functions, especially within the context of the charge questions that we've been provided. I look forward to learning a lot more about what these processes look like and what are some opportunities that we can better engage youth within them and how we can help aid the EPA in its mission of effectively carrying out its due diligence and promoting these goals. It's been an honor serving with you all, and I'm certainly look forward to the next 2 years ahead.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Rachel?
I'm actually very excited for the future of our work together in this council. Hearing my colleagues talk about their passions and experiences have given me a new layer of appreciation for the very diverse representation that we have on the council and the ways in which we can move forward together as we continue to address these charged topics. I think we have a very promising future ahead of us, and hopefully that we can see that there is a change that comes about.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Alexandra?
I think one of the things we can pull out of this is that we have a very diverse group of people with very diverse issues that we've addressed yesterday and today with connection to culture, community, justice, education, and policy. And one of the biggest things that are asked of us is how we can engage with people like us, people younger than us, generations to come. And I do want to thank the presenters for having an easy to digest presentation with a plethora of information. And it was very impressive to me that they were able to umbrella each of the topics that we will be diving into.
Thanks, Alexandra. We're going to finish off our round of final conclusions here, but I want to acknowledge that Dan Utek has joined us, so thank you. So over to Asada now.
Asada Rashidi from Newark, New Jersey, representing the interests of environmental justice in disadvantaged communities. It's been a pleasure being here with you all for these past 2 days and engaging in these important conversations surrounding environmental justice, climate change, and circular economy. I think that the presentations that we observed yesterday and the roundtable discussion with the administrator were really great, and I'm looking forward to working with you all in our different work groups and convening again. I think that the one highlight I've taken away is that we need to bridge the gaps between the youth and our elderly, because they have been in this movement for a long time, and that, you know, as youth, we are the next generation. This is our world. We are the current leaders, and we have to be able to have a world to sustain, and we want to make sure we're having these intergenerational discussions so that all our efforts and our work is amplified and benefiting all of our communities.
Thank you, Asada. Lisette?
Lisette Perez from Chicago, representing environmental advocates from disadvantaged communities. And I'm honestly honored to be a part of this council. You all are really great individuals doing great work, and it's always nice to learn from you all. And I'm excited and eager to keep learning from you all because you guys are just awesome, really. And yeah, the presentations, the speakers, we learned a lot. I'm very excited to get to work and use what we learned to really push for change. And thank you to the public for joining us. It was really nice to hear public comments as well. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lisette. Magana?
Hi, I'm Megana Kinapredi from Houston, and I represent the interests of environmental educators integrating environmental justice into school curriculums. Like Lisette and everyone else said, it's been really great getting to know all of you, and it's such an honor to serve on this council. I've loved hearing all the presentations. They were super in detail, and I learned a lot from this experience. And thank you to the administrator and to all of you guys for being here. It's such a great experience.
Thanks, Magana. Paige?
Hello, my name is Paige Siragotis. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and I'm representing the connection between psychology, mental health, and the environment. We've talked a lot the past few days, and we've talked about a lot of different topics, and especially this morning with the administrator, there were a lot of different topics that we covered, and they were all very important topics, and I think we've all kind of delved in, and I'm very excited to go in deeper with all of these topics, and we have a lot of different perspectives, as Rachel touched on earlier, but we're all very passionate about whatever we do, and I'm really excited for what the future holds of this council.
Thanks, Paige. Emmanuel?
Yeah, I first want to thank all the folks who gave presentations. I mean, it's no easy feat to be in the weeds and into your own work and make something cohesive and digestible for younger folks and for people in the public. Thanking people in the public for making public comments, our co-chairs for running this meeting very seamlessly, and for the agency and Administrator Regan for setting up the neyac. We often talk about centering youth voices, and I think it's fantastic to be with such incredible people and to be serving in like a youth-led committee. And I'm really looking forward to the work that we're all going to be doing.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Osa Seneca.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry, I did a little location change. But yeah, very excited to be joined with everybody here on the neyac. Thank you to everybody who attended, person virtually. Thank you to our co-chairs for running, Carissa as well. Everybody involved in putting this together. Really looking forward to the next almost 2 years. Just really hopeful that a lot of the things that we're talking about can turn into actual actionable items that are delivered to the people who really need it, and we can measure that impact. So just looking forward to getting started in the working groups and seeing more of the great work that is going to come out of this inspiration. So thank you.
Thanks, Osa Seneca. Over to my co-chair, Gabriel.
Thank you, Kiera. I'm incredibly excited to work with you all over the next 2 years. I think this is an incredible group, and we can really do a lot of the hard work necessary to provide recommendations to the EPA. I'd say what I'm most looking forward to is that this is a platform where the EPA and the United States and our government doesn't just listen to us, but also hears us and implements the solutions and recommendations that we have so that youth are actually brought to the table and their decisions are fully incorporated. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kiera.
Thanks, Gabriel. Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what's been said. I think there's an incredible diversity of both background, experience, viewpoint around this table. We have all of the necessary pieces. We're all, I think, doing a fantastic job of appreciating the gravity of representing communities, which is what we have been entrusted with. And I also want to thank the EPA for trusting us, for trusting youth voices, for trusting youth knowledge, and for inviting us to this table. So I'll keep it short, but I'll turn it back over to Carissa.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for that impromptu round robin on the reflections of what the today as well as yesterday was. So with that, again, I will welcome Dan Utek. Dan is EPA's Chief of Staff. He's going to be giving us our closing remarks. Just a little bit about Dan. Dan has over 20 years of experience in environmental policy, which actually started at EPA as a presidential management intern. Dan has served in senior leadership roles at both the White House and Department of Energy, working on developing and implementing energy and climate change policy. Prior to his federal agency experience, Dan worked in the Senate for 10 years, where he focused on a range of environmental and energy policy issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
Okay. Thanks so much, Carissa. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here. As Chris said, my name is Dan Utek. I'm the Chief of Staff here to Administrator Regan at the EPA. When I attended the neyac launch in November, I was really impressed with all of you, with your bios, the experience you bring to this committee. And it made me think about back to when I sort of got interested in environmental issues. I was in my mid-20s living in Boston at the time, and climate change was really just coming to the fore then as an issue that we were going to have to grapple with. So I decided that I wanted to learn more about it and other issues and figure out how I could get involved. And I will spare you the rest of the details, but I bring that up mostly to say that, even if there'd been an neyac back then, I don't know whether I would have had the wherewithal to apply. And that's a long way of me saying that I'm really inspired by each and all of you and the ways in which you've already demonstrated a commitment to EPA's mission of protecting human health and the environment. I gather you've really been digging in over the last couple of days, and it seems like you had a really robust agenda. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Carissa, our neyac designated federal officer. A lot of work goes into putting these things together, so thank you, Carissa. I want to thank our two co-chairs, Kiera and Gabrielle. Gabriel, thank you. And then I also want to thank all of you for your work in communities, first and foremost, but also for your work as members of the NEAC and for your time and thoughtful questions and discussion over the last couple of days. So please give yourselves a round. So I'm echoing a little bit what I heard just since walking in the room 10 minutes ago, but you know, each of you provides a unique perspective and you bring your own lived experiences that have formed who you are and your work where you live in a variety of environmental fields. So while there may be only 15 of you around this table and online, collectively your input and voices represent a cross-section of young people across the country. And as Administrator Regan said this morning, the thoughts, perspectives, and solutions that you and other youth across the nation bring forward to the agency are invaluable. Over the last couple of days, you've heard presentations from experts here at EPA about the important work we're doing on climate, on environmental justice, food loss, and waste and recycling. And you've begun to share your thoughts and recommendations about how we can better engage youth in our work. And that's really exciting. But I think what's even more exciting is that this is really just the start of your journey as members of the council. We're excited to continue to learn from you and work with this council for the next 2 years. As our Deputy Administrator Janet McCabe emphasized yesterday in her opening remarks, through this council, we can push each other to come up with creative ways to solve problems and provide clean air, clean water, and clean land for our communities, particularly for communities that have faced the brunt of these issues for far too long. So I really hope that the momentum of this meeting will energize and inspire you as you work together in the coming months to further discuss these issues and develop recommendations for how the agency can work better with young people to advance our mission. Your input is critical so that we can come up with innovative solutions to build cleaner, healthier, more equitable communities nationwide. People like to say that, you know, youth are our leaders of tomorrow. And I think through this body, you all are actually leaders of today, and you're helping us to develop solutions that will protect our planet for generations to come. So I thank you for your willingness to embark on this journey with us. I wish you luck as you take on these next steps of really digging in on recommendations. We're looking forward to getting those recommendations back, and I look forward to seeing you at future meetings. And with that, I will hand it back over to Carissa. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for those inspiring words. I know working with the council over the past few months, I know they are excited and they are ready to provide their input based on their community perspectives that they represent. They're ready to showcase their leadership on addressing the charge questions put forth by EPA yesterday, and of course the continued discussion today. With that, I do want to say thank you all to the NEAC members, to EPA staff, to the public for your patience over the last 2 days as we navigated our first ever NEAC meeting. So thank you for that. And as a reminder, the public comment period will remain open through March 14th. As if you would like to upload any public comment regarding the discussions, regarding the presentations that you heard yesterday, please do so. And again, thank you for joining us for this first ever NEAC meeting. I am officially adjourning this National Environmental Youth Advisory Council meeting.